You might have heard that for several months now, the European Union has been locked in heated debates over whether to slap extra tariffs on China's new energy vehicles. Inside the EU, opinions have always been split. Some argue that raising taxes is necessary to protect Europe's auto industry. Others warn that such a move could provoke China and even spark harsh countermeasures. But in August this year, the EU finally made its move, officially deciding to impose additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles entering the European market. To many, it looked like the EU was openly declaring economic competition with China. Yet, what no one foresaw was that these sanctions wouldn't intimidate China at all. Instead, they created a golden opportunity for Russia. The market share that once belonged to Europe is now being quietly taken over by Moscow through new trade deals with Beijing. In the global new energy vehicle market, competition has become more intense than ever. In some key breakthrough technologies, the gap between Europe, China, and the United States continues to widen. China's electric vehicles and battery technology have proven not only highly advanced, but also far more affordable than their European counterparts. On average, Chinese-made electric vehicles are around 20% cheaper than those produced within the EU. As a result, Chinese electric vehicles captured 12% of the EU market in 2023, and that number could climb beyond 18% by 2025. Under such pressure, the EU has been rolling out economic security and supply chain protection strategies since last year, all aimed at reducing what it calls strategic dependence on China. During this de-risking process, France has been especially vocal. Determined not to fall behind China in the global electric vehicle race, it joined forces with several EU nations in June 2024 to introduce tariffs of 17.4%, 20%, and 38.1% on major Chinese car makers such as BYD, Geely, and SAIC Group, while other manufacturers faced a general 21% tariff. According to the European Commission, if no company requests a hearing within 10 days, or if no majority objection is raised, the proposal automatically passes. In other words, the EU's plan to tax Chinese electric vehicles is practically a done deal, with final measures expected within 4 months after the temporary tariffs take effect. These new tariffs will put unprecedented cost pressure on Chinese automakers exporting to Europe. Data shows that in 28 European countries, about 20% of newly registered electric vehicles are made in China. In 2023 alone, China exported 4.6 million vehicles, of which 900,000 were new energy vehicles, valued at $11.5 billion, nearly 57% of China's total auto exports. At first glance, it seems Chinese automakers still have vast potential in Europe. Exports even grew by more than 100% year-on-year. But now the situation has turned complicated. As the EU's new tariffs take effect, Chinese cars will become pricier, widening the gap between them and locally made European vehicles. For any company, operating without profit for too long is simply unsustainable. Naturally, Beijing won't stay silent in the face of the EU's hardline stance. In June 2024, China responded by launching an anti-dumping investigation into pork and pork byproducts imported from the EU, a direct hit at one of Europe's most important export sectors. China consumes over 55 million tons of pork every year, nearly half of the world's total. Though it's also a major producer, it still relies on imports to fill domestic demand. Much of that pork currently comes from EU countries like Spain, the Netherlands, France, Germany, and Denmark, where exporters make huge profits in the Chinese market. However, once anti-dumping duties take effect, these countries stand to lose heavily. Take Spain, for instance. Its pork exports to China reached 560,000 tons in 2023. If tariffs are imposed, the Spanish pork industry could lose nearly $400 million. Analysts predict that EU pork exports could plunge 30 to 40%, with prices rising at least 20%, wiping out their previous competitive edge. This tension has already caused rifts inside Europe. Nations such as Germany, Denmark, Italy, and Hungary have openly opposed the EU's tariff policy on Chinese electric vehicles. Interestingly, at that point, China's anti-dumping actions hadn't yet been fully implemented. Seeking to diffuse tensions, Germany's economic minister even pushed for direct dialogue between China and Europe. Still, after several rounds of talks, the EU only made minor changes. For example, reducing SAIC's tariff from 38.1% to 36.3% and BYDs from 17.4% to 17%. The EU justified its decision by claiming that Chinese automakers enjoy excessive government subsidies, making a major tariff rollback impossible. With neither side willing to back down, the issue is now at a stalemate. To overturn the EU's decision, at least 15 member states would need to vote against it, but so far, only 4 countries have clearly opposed. Ultimately, Europe moved ahead with the high tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. But what happened next was unexpected. When China began targeting European pork, Russia stepped in immediately, signing new trade deals with Chinese pork suppliers. Russian pork producers welcomed the move, promising to ensure steady pork exports to China. By August 2024, China had already signed contracts with 3 Russian pork exporters, shipping around 50,000 to 60,000 tons of pork. Russia even announced plans to capture 10% of China's pork import market within the next 3 to 4 years. For Europe, that means potentially being pushed out of China's massive pork market altogether, a devastating scenario for producers who depend heavily on Chinese demand. Economic experts in Germany have warned that if Russia successfully replaces the EU as China's main pork supplier, Europe will face a pork glut at home, driving prices down and destabilizing the entire industry. In the end, the EU's tariff war with China hasn't significantly hurt Beijing. Instead, it's hurt Europe's own industries and strengthened Russia's economic foothold. To make matters worse, China is expanding its countermeasures. On August 20, 2024, the European Commission released its final draft decision on anti-subsidy investigations against Chinese electric vehicles. Almost immediately, China's Ministry of Commerce announced a new investigation into EU dairy products. Just a day later, on August 21st, the ministry officially launched the probe after confirming credible evidence from China's Dairy and Dairy Products Association. Interestingly, one of Russia's largest dairy producers had already begun rail shipments of milk to China as early as May 2024. However, the journey from Moscow to China takes 23 days, posing logistical challenges. Russian officials admitted they're working on faster routes to expand this trade, a move that could further tighten Russia-China cooperation. Looking at the bigger picture, the EU originally wanted to use sanctions to pressure China's electric vehicle industry, but instead, it undermined its own supply chains. China's measured but strategic counterattacks have been highly effective, precisely targeting Europe's economic weak spots. In contrast, Russia has quietly gained valuable breathing space amid Western sanctions and the ongoing Ukraine conflict, turning the EU's misstep into its own advantage. As China continues its anti-dumping probes into EU products like brandy and pork, further tariffs could soon follow. So, the real question now is, in this geopolitical chess match between China and Europe, who's the real winner? Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next deep dive into the world's biggest economic power plays.